Hi there, church. It's Tuesday, and we're working our way through the last week of Jesus' earthly ministry. And so yesterday we looked at Jesus cleansing the temple, and one of the things we just noted in passing is that on his way back into Jerusalem, so he goes in the first day of the triumphal entry, he goes into the temple late at night and inspects it. He goes back to Bethany. He comes back the next day. On his way there, he curses a fig tree that has no figs, and then he cleanses the temple, teaches in the temple, and then he heads back to Bethany. And then on Tuesday, we pick up the story in Mark chapter 11. It says, as they passed by the next morning, they saw the fig tree withered away at its roots. All right, so Jesus had cursed the fig tree the day before, and they're taking the same route back into Jerusalem the next day, and that fig tree that he had cursed had withered away right to its roots. It says, Peter remembered and said to him, Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed is withered. And Jesus answered him, have faith in God. Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer and believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father also, who is in heaven, may also forgive you your trespasses. So Jesus gives a little lesson about the fig tree, and it's interesting. So he said, think about this. So they're walking into Jerusalem, taking the same path back into Jerusalem where they've gone to the temple, and the temple, remember, is on a mount, right? Jerusalem is set on a mountain, and the temple itself is on the peak of the mountain. That's why they call it the Temple Mount. And here he says, truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain. Notice Jesus doesn't say a mountain, he says this mountain, okay? Well, what mountain would Jesus be referring to? He'd be referring to the mountain where Jerusalem sits, where the temple sits. And what does he say? Whoever says to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes what he says, it will come to pass and be done for him. So I want you to think about that, because the next kind of most popular thing that Jesus did on the Tuesday is in the evening, he goes up onto the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives is a mountain beside Jerusalem with olive trees on it. And there Jesus gives what is called the Olivet Discourse, okay? And many of us know this. This is in Matthew chapter 24. This is where, and I'm going to start actually in verse 23. So Jesus goes back, and then after he says that to his disciples, whoever says to this mountain, be picked up and thrown into the sea, and doesn't doubt in his heart, it'll be done for him. Then he goes into the temple, and he has kind of his final confrontation with the Pharisees, who, remember, have wanted to kill him for a long time now, and especially after his triumphal entry wanted to kill him. And so in Matthew chapter 23, his conflict with the Pharisees kind of culminates, and he begins to pronounce all of these woes on the Pharisees. And that's in Matthew chapter 23. Woe to you, blind guides, he says. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, for you are hypocrites. That's verses 23, 25, 27. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and uncleanliness. Outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous, saying, if we had lived in these days of our fathers, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. Thus you witness against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your fathers. You serpents, you brood of vipers, how are you to escape being sentenced to hell? Therefore I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, some of whom you kill and crucify, and some you will flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town, so that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of the righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. So Jesus' conflict with the Pharisees, I mean, he's talked to them and he's answered the questions in riddles, right? I mean, every time they try to trap him, he answers them in a way that kind of confounds them and confuses them. But this is it. Jesus unleashes on the Pharisees, calling them whitewashed tombs, calling them hypocrites, telling them that they're full of dead dead men's bones. And he says that the blood of all the prophets that have been killed at the hands of Israel throughout all generations will come down on their heads. And then Jesus laments over Jerusalem. Verse 37, he says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate, for I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" Now his disciples are with him, and you can picture kind of the disciples like watching, kind of standing behind Jesus as he's unleashing on the scribes and the Pharisees. You can see them kind of like, in the background. You can imagine them, I should say. And but notice that this moment when he says, "Your house," where is he standing? In the temple. What's he just said to them? If you ask for this mountain to be thrown into the sea and don't doubt in your hearts it'll happen, right? Your house, this temple that we're standing in, will be left to you desolate. He said these things. Notice the disciples are starting to pick up on what Jesus is saying, because the very next chapter starts, Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. So it's like they're saying, like this temple, like look how beautiful it is. Look how God glorifying it is. And Jesus says, he answered them, "You see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." So I want you to think back to what we said yesterday, right? What we said yesterday is that Jesus came, he cleanses the temple because he inspects it. And what is the command in Leviticus chapter 14 to a priest who finds a persistent disease, a persistent corruption in a house? It's to take it apart, stone by stone. And that's what he says. Not one stone here will be left upon another. And then that's when the disciples come to him and say, "When will this be? And what will be the signs of the coming end of the age?" So they understand that if the temple's destroyed, there's an age that's coming to an end. And that is the age of the sacrificial system, the priesthood, all of Israel's worship that centers around the temple. If the temple is destroyed, if the temple is taken away, then something radically different is about to happen. And so Jesus goes on in Matthew 24 and talks about the Olivet Discourse, and he talks about the time in which the temple is going to be destroyed. And I don't have time to get into all of it now. I would really recommend to you, there's on Right Now Media, there's a audio lecture series of this, but he also has a book. It's by R.C. Sproul called The Last Days According to Jesus. And he goes through the Olivet Discourse, and he talks about the Olivet Discourse and the temple's destruction in 70 AD. And what's so interesting is if you fast forward to the book of Revelation, it talks about the mountain of God being thrown into the sea. And it's talking at the time when it's called Israel, Babylon, and when it's called Israel, the enemy of God's people. And so there comes a time, and all of this is culminating. Jesus has come into the city, right? He's declared himself to be the king. He comes to the temple of God. He sees that it still has a persistent corruption. He cleanses it. He pronounces woes upon it, and then he prophesies that within if you look at Genesis or Matthew chapter 24, verse 34, after he talks about all the things that are going to happen leading up to the temple's destruction, he says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, this generation shall not pass away before all these things take place." And this prophecy that not one stone will be left upon another, all was fulfilled in 70 AD, 40 years, a Jewish generation, 40 years after Jesus had declared these words in 70 AD, long after his death, resurrection, and ascension into heaven. So that's what Jesus was doing on the Tuesday of his last week. Join me again tomorrow, and we'll talk about Wednesday.